Alright now, gentlemen, welcome to another fantastic day of online learning, which is to be our last, I'm led to believe, with tomorrow being back in the classroom. So we're going to kick off today's lesson with a review of tasks 15 and 16 from our workbook, which was set yesterday. So if you get your answers in front of you for a little bit of self-assessment. So looking at 15A. So at a barbecue with friends, Jeremy says to you, "I'll eat this hot chili if you give me $1,000. Laughingly, you agree. Then Jeremy scoffs the chili and demands $1,000. No, the agreement is not legally enforceable as it is not serious and commercial in nature. This is because the agreement is a joking commitment amongst friends. So certainly this is one of those personal commitments amongst friends and whānau that our judicial system, our courts, would not want to be drawn into. It would be an immense waste of time for our judges if they were asked to opine on matters like this. So looking at 15B, so we've got Hone, a real estate agent, and Banyu, a chef, who are best mates. Banyu is selling his house as he's moving to Glamilton and asks Hone to find a buyer and manage the sale. Hone informs Banyu of his marketing strategy and commission rate, which after they both agree that Hone should sell the house, following which Hone successfully finds a buyer, sells the house for a very satisfying amount, but when Hone asks Banyu to pay his commission, Banyu replies, "Come on mate, there should be no cost as we're best mates." Well, I'm sorry Banyu, yes this is a legally enforceable agreement, because the contract is serious and commercial in nature. And this because selling a house is an important activity. It's a very costly activity which requires a lot of effort by the person selling, which in most cases is a professional real estate agent. So in this case here, we would expect Banyu to be liable. He has a duty to pay Hone his fees for carrying out the contracted task of selling Banyu's house. Alrighty, task 16. So considering a couple of more situations here, we have Geraldo. He's at home and he hears a knock on his door. He opens it to meet Mr. Green, who says he's just finished pruning Geraldo's trees, which he thought looked overgrown. Mr. Green is seeking payment for his work, and this shocks Geraldo as he has never met Mr. Green, nor did he actually want his trees trimmed as he liked them as they were. No, as there was no offer by Mr. Green to prune the trees, nor was there any acceptance by Geraldo to have his trees pruned, this is not a valid contract. So no agreement has been formed here, and Geraldo is not liable to pay Mr. Green any amount. In fact, Geraldo might be able to claim some compensation off Mr. Green for damaging his prized trees, but that's a story for another day. Finn is at a hotel and sees that his room has a mini fridge, wherein he finds chocolate bars and bottles of juice and fizzy drinks. He consumes all the food and drink, but is upset later to find a pamphlet on top of the fridge that contains the prices of each item of food. Finn calls the hotel manager and says, "I wouldn't have consumed them if I knew they weren't free." Well, sadly, I believe this is a situation which would meet the requirements of offer and acceptance. Now, remember, with offer and acceptance can occur by actions as opposed to verbally or a signed agreement between both parties, and I think the actions of Finn here constitute acceptance of the hotel's offer to sell these chocolate bars and fizzy drinks. So it's also common in the hotel industry that food and drinks in a room's mini fridge can be chargeable if consumed. The hotel made the offer by making the food and drinks available and listing the prices in the pamphlet on top of the fridge. So Finn's actions of consuming the food and drink would be considered acceptance here. Alrighty, moving to consider our two slides today on the valid elements of a contract. Let's have a closer look at capacity. So capacity, we're talking about mental ability, mental capacity to enter contracts. So a person needs to have capacity to enter a contract so that they can understand the rights and the responsibilities of the contract. This can be undermined, of course, if somebody is intoxicated. So intoxicated might relate to taking prescription medicines. So if somebody has sleep issues and they are prescribed some kind of sleep drug, and then they were to wander out of their home and start trying to enter into contracts, they would be intoxicated. Also, alcohol and illegal substances would bear on this intoxication. People also get intoxicated by accident by consuming hazardous chemicals accidentally, whether that be in the workplace or at home. Mental health, of course, can be a reason why there isn't capacity. Might relate to a diagnosed or undiagnosed disorder for the likes of schizophrenia, might be an example here, which means somebody doesn't have the ability to understand the rights and responsibilities of a contract. Impairments, so impairments, we might be talking about an injury here, for example, or a disability. So if somebody took a head knock, maybe they fell off their electric scooter, they might be impaired, they might be severely concussed, and they might not be able to understand the rights and responsibilities of the contract. And finally, age. Age is a factor certainly for entering into many contracts. You have to be over the age of 16 or over the age of 18 for some of these, and that reflects that if you're younger, you often don't have the life experience or mental development to be able to understand the rights and responsibilities of contracts. So without capacity, so if people have these factors such as intoxication, mental health, impairments, or a very young age, there could be unfair disadvantages. An example of this is that someone might be very naive about the prices that a good or a service product is sold for, and the seller might be able to take advantage over that naivety. This might be a young buyer, and accordingly, that young buyer might be charged a very high and very unfairly high price. Secondly, inability to understand rights and complete contractual duties. So without capacity, someone might not understand that when entering into a hire purchase agreement that they need to make ongoing payments. So perhaps we have that person who's had a bit of a head knock and they turn up to a car yard, so a place where vehicles are sold, and they purchase a car on a hire purchase agreement, and they drive away with the car, not appreciating that they need to pay the remaining 80% of the purchase price in terms of ongoing hire purchase payments. So without that understanding, they would find themselves subsequently breaching the contract, and there will be, of course, consequences to that. Another downside to someone without capacity entering into a contract is that a third or external party. So a third party just means another person who is not a party to the contract. That third party may be unfairly required to complete the contract. A classic example here is where children have signed up for a contract, or they've entered into agreement, and parents have suddenly found out that their child has a duty to make payment of money or to carry out an action, and that parent might feel obliged to carry out that action or that duty themselves, which is unfair on the parent there. Inability to understand consequences. So it's very important for people and businesses that when they enter into contracts, they understand risks and consequences that they will face if things don't go as intended. So without capacity, you may not understand that when purchasing a house with a mortgage, that if you don't pay your mortgage, the bank can come and take your home from you. So capacity gives people an insight into consequences, what might go wrong from not carrying out duties and responsibilities. But without capacity, you might be unaware of the encouragement that adverse consequences would give somebody. And our final slide for the day, we're looking at consent. So consent must be given freely for it to be a valid contract. So all parties to a valid contract must want and intend to enter the contract. So we don't want people who find themselves in a contract and bound by the duties and obligations when really they didn't intend to enter the contract. It was some kind of accident, or they were forced into the contract by unfair means. So where that's the case and consent was obtained, consent was given in unfair circumstances, the contract is invalid and voidable. And voidable is that term we looked at earlier in this topic about a contract not being enforceable. It's a contract that can be essentially dissolved because it doesn't have the elements of a valid contract. Unfair means for gaining consent, of course, can be threatening behavior. So threatening behavior is behavior where the other party threatens violence or threatens some kind of negative consequence to the other party if they do not enter into the contract. So if a salesperson pulls out a gun and threatens to shoot the buyer if they don't purchase the product, that of course is threatening behavior to get that consent, sale and purchase. Blackmail, that's a reference to an unfair activity where one party threatens to reveal compromising or damaging information about the other party unless they do what that party is asking them to do. And our example here is if we've got a banker and he goes to a potential client that if you don't borrow money from my bank, I will reveal to the business community that your business illegally sources raw materials from North Korea, which is against some of our geopolitical agreements at the moment, that we don't purchase raw materials from North Korea. That is blackmail. It's sort of trying to coerce somebody into doing an action under the threat that that person's history or negative history will be revealed to other persons. So it's similar to a threat there, just a more specific type of threat. And blackmail is illegal under the law in New Zealand. Undue influence. So undue influence, we're referring to a situation where one party enters into a contract, but they're entering into the contract based on this unfair or undue influence by another party, by a third party. And often that influence comes from a special relationship between the parties, but there is a power imbalance between those two parties. So an example would be a daughter and her parents. So obviously a special relationship between the two parties, but there's a power imbalance. We've got a healthy young daughter who's loved and doted by her elderly parents, though, who are starting to fade, and so the daughter's got much stronger mental capacity. Her trying to get the elderly parents to mortgage their house to support her risky business. So that's often evident where there's an unbeneficial contract for the person being pressured. Today's activities, guys, is complete task 17 on page 27 and task 18.